This is awesome.
Church of Mabus radio show. You're listening to United Public Radio 107.7 FM. I had to check real quick on my break to make sure my Killing Joke Blu-ray was coming of the new Batman Alan Moore cartoon, which is based on the Alan Moore comic Killing Joke. But and it comes with a limited edition Joker, so to make sure that's coming still. It's coming. But yeah, I think I've read the Alan Moore comic a long time ago. I need to rebuy it, reread it. I've been meaning to buy those Joker comics, but they just did the cartoon of it, and it's got Mark Hamill doing Joker's voice. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Plus a little bitty figure, of course. Well, Gordon, what was your first book? How many books do you have total, and what was your first book?
The first one was Starships. The second one was the Chaos Protocols. There was only a couple of months between them. What happened, and this is sort of the thing that happens, I guess, with magic in general, is that the company I was working for in London was actually a German startup. And so I'd be alternating between London and Hamburg. And this startup was acquired by an American media business. And I had to wait a year for my shares to vest. And I kind of describe it as my year in an airport prison, because it was a Silicon Valley business, which means there was free food and there was a beer tap that was controlled by an iPad and all those sort of silly things. But I wasn't in the head office. I was in a satellite office. I was in London, and their head office was obviously in San Francisco. So I didn't really have a whole lot to do. And the shares vested, and I sort of got my exit within 70 hours of these two different publishers, Llewellyn in the US and Scarlet Imprint in the UK, emailing going, hey, if you ever want to write a book. So I kind of got this surprise amount of money, which was almost exactly a year's salary, and these two book offers to show up at once. And I'm like, well, that's a fairly obvious quote-unquote sign, if you will. So that's what I was going to do. And that year was, what year is it now? So that's what I was going to do with 2014. I said yes to both of them. It was an ambitious schedule. I can write 2 books in a year if that's all I'm doing. That lasted all of 3 months before a dream job showed up. And so suddenly I had 3 jobs. And that I wouldn't recommend. So they came out, they were written, they don't interrelate, they're not sequels, they are 2 entirely separate different projects, because I had something to say about the economics we are facing. And I also, from my background, I mean, I used to work for Discovery Channel and I studied documentary at university and so on. So my background has been very interested in, has always been interested in ancient history and magic. So there's that book, and then there's the practical book. And it was just an odd confluence of events that had them show up within several months of each other.
Didn't you write some book about witch apocalypse or something?
Oh, there is a book by, another Scarlet Imprint book you're referring to, which is excellent, called Apocalyptic Witchcraft, and that's by Peter Gray. That's not by me. That's from one of the founders of Scarlet Imprint.
Oh, okay. I was wondering where I couldn't remember where I read that. Something about I think I read it at Greg's site or something about it there under your bio or something.
Yeah, potentially. Peter and I are friends, and I that's a remarkable book. It's very much in the sort of where witchcraft is at today. I'm not a witch. I'm very witchcraft sympathetic, but it's not my road. That's for people who are though, and you haven't read it, definitely read it.
I'll have to check it out for sure. Well, I was kind of curious. We've had Peter Levinda on before, and supposedly he was involved in the Simon Collective that wrote that paperback Necronomicon. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? The paperback Simon edition.
Sure.
Well, I had some weird experiences with that book in my early 20s. Just briefly, at 17, I had testicular cancer. I had to go through all that crap and chemo and stuff, and then shortly after, my dad died, and I started dabbling in the occult. Like, I had a bunch of bad stuff happen: cancer, chemo, death, divorce. So I just started experimenting. I went through my little experimentation with drugs, started reading occult books, going to Manson concerts and all that stuff. And during that time, I started to attract paranormal type activity from UFOs to, and my family, who were sober and not into any of that kind of stuff would see them too. It was like I would see it and they would be there too, and I had witnesses to the events. And I started attracting UFO activity over my home, and I also saw a wide variety of different sorts of beings, from light beings to some that seemed very serpentine-like, that were kind of holographically weird. The closest I've ever seen to them have been like Mayan pictures of gods and stuff like that. Saw some little beings that were in cloaks standing around a black box. But what I was wanting to get to is it seemed like on some level there were other things that I was reading stuff on Druidism and that book, the Necronomicon. I was being very foolish with it, just like yelling stuff out like an idiot. I didn't care. And I started to attract a lot of stuff. And when I talked to Peter Levinda about it, he said that he's heard similar stories of people having weird experiences with that book. I know a lot of people think it's fiction, but obviously I don't really. I think there may be fiction elements in it, of course, but I think there's also weird, possible other stuff drawn from other, systems or Sumerian or Babylonian gods or something. But I'm kind of curious as far as the Seals of Solomon and all that stuff in it. Is that what's in the Necronomicon on some level? Is that the same thing? And what are your thoughts on the Necronomicon and people that use it for a magical system, and have you?
Yeah, of course I have. I didn't have the tragedies you just described, but I certainly had a misspent youth of that kind of thing. The drugs, the Marilyn Manson, the Necronomicon, and so on. I mean, of course it works. We don't know when we're dealing with... The word magic is one of the blind men fondling the same elephant as paranormal and so on. We're dealing with a range of phenomena that seems to present itself in mysterious ways or in ways that it chooses, hence the role of the trickster within a magical cosmology. And the Necronomicon or the Simonomicon, when does something become fiction and when does it not? The secret to the Necronomicon is, if you look at what it is and unpack how it came to be, this is the trick, and this is sort of why, the authorship question remains. It remains deliberately because you're supposed to follow along that line. If you look at the grimoires, like quote-unquote real grimoires from, the early modern period and so on, if you look at the Grimoire Verum, if you look at the Armadale, any of the sort of historic quote-unquote real grimoires, they have the same thing. They have a fake origin story, to do with a monk who might have gone up a mountain to talk to the spirit of Avernus, and the spirit of Avernus sort of taught him about how to use this book, and this is that very book in your hands, and all that. It's in there. So when does something become fiction? When the forces on the other side of what Dr. Kreiper would call a one-way mirror have some sort of separate reality. There are probably... The Necronomicon isn't probably intellectually interesting enough to use on a continual basis. It certainly works, and it certainly works in the sense of, I guess, smoking DMT rather than going and having an authentic shamanic experience with a proper shaman somewhere in the jungle using ayahuasca and kind of organic delivery systems. It will work. There are probably more satisfying ways of kind of coming to the realization that magic works.
Definitely, and some of the things that revolved around that with me were definitely peculiar, and I got rid of the books because I thought I'd bring in own stuff, but I rebought them not too long ago. But I was definitely a bit foolish with it, but we didn't. Peter's never really admitted that he's part of that, but when he wrote that Dark Lord and stuff, it kind of seemed like like he was coming out a little bit. That book.
Well, he said different things at different times. He's always sort of maintained he helped with the translation, but that he's not Simon, and that, I mean, legally that's the case. So again, it's one of those things, and this is the case with magic in general. You don't want to spoil the magic. It's like explaining a joke. It's not funny if you do.
Definitely. Well, I wanted to tell Jay that there's a kind of a role-playing Dungeons and Dragons reference in Chaos Protocol. There's a section God plays dice with the universe, but she uses a D20.
Cool. It's kind of an in-joke, Gordon. My only experience with magic is through the game Dungeons and Dragons, but the way it's described in that fictional game and from other magicians, the magic works basically exactly the same, and I just thought that was kind of fascinating.
There's weird occult stuff in Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, look, and here you are on a paranormal radio show, so it's obviously a gateway drug.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I don't know if you've had a chance, Gordon, or if you've heard of that TV show that's on Netflix, Stranger Things. Have you heard about that?
I have. I've seen it.
Oh, did you like it?
I did. I thought it was encouraging that we can kind of start telling stories about things like MKUltra and the UFO phenomenon in ways that I think are probably closer to the reality than little alien bodies freeze-dried or frozen at, Edwards Air Force Base or something.
Yeah, I told Christopher Knowles about it from Secret Sun, and he saw it, and I said, if you watch this, you'll blog about it, and then he blogged about it like 2 days later.
Yeah, he's seen it through twice. It's really resonated with him. There's a book by, if you like that stuff, there's a book, a novel by a British writer called Christopher Brookmyre called Pandemonium, which I've read, and it's essentially about, it's a horror novel, like an airport horror novel, about a Scottish school trip that goes camping, and they kind of encounter demon and abduction-y stuff in a similar way to Stranger Things. So the show, I really, really enjoyed it. It didn't impress me on the same level maybe did Chris, because you could kind of see the beats coming. I think it's just very encouraging that we can have that, and it's also really good to remind yourself that Winona Ryder can really act.
Yeah, she did a really good job in it. I have Christopher Garantona. He did that Montauk Chronicles. He's coming on in September. He was saying they used his sizzle reel or some pictures from his documentary or something, but we're going to talk about that in September. I'm trying to find look up that book you just mentioned, Pandemonium by Christopher Brookmyre.
Yeah, it's old now, so this is another one you can buy for like 1 cent off Amazon, presumably. But it's a cracking read if you're in the mood for kind of like a bit of airport fiction, demon stuff. It's good. My understanding of the town or the show was going to be called Montauk originally.
Yeah, it was. They changed it, and who knows, but I definitely like the references. They list it on Bloody Disgusting, a horror site I go to, like all the gems in it hidden, or what do they call it when there's a little hint of something in it. All the movies like Stand By Me, like there's so many movies that it referenced in there. It was just like a 80s plethora of creamy goodness hidden in that in the Stranger Things.
Yeah, and I thought that was very cleverly done, because it was or almost a cut-up, because, yeah, you had Jaws, you had Evil Dead, you had music choices.
Yeah, Seconds.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I sort of describe it as if Whitley Strieber had written E.T.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how they're going to do a second season. They left some things open, but I'm hoping that their skill crafting continues into the second season. So we'll see how it goes. It did very well, so I'm sure they're going to keep pumping it out, hopefully. Looking forward to it for sure. No doubt about it. And good to see Winona Ryder back. I know she had a little klepto fall from grace or whatever, shoplifting a long time ago, and she kind of vanished. She's been in a couple of things, but it's been her biggest thing.
I thought she really held that together. I mean, that's a really challenging thing to play, like a mother who loses a kid, and I thought she did really good.
And dealing with multidimensional realities.
Well, it's funny. So I was talking to a number of people, because I'd just moved, so I'd been without internet and so on, and I only recently watched it, but people have been bothering me to watch it, saying this is all the kind of stuff we talk about. And I know it's fiction, right? So, like, it has to follow a narrative shape, but it seems strange to me that at no stage did Winona Ryder take like the Exorcist or Poltergeist route and get in like a psychic or a priest or anyone, and they were all trying to solve it without. Because talking to friends in California, and I'm like, if that had started to happen to you, you just take a trip down to Santeria Town and say, I need some help.
There's a show on Cinemax called Outcast. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I've not watched it.
It's really good. It's like it's got a lot of exorcism stuff in it, but it's done like it's probably the best show like that I've seen ever, or even to a movie. It's pretty excellent. 'Cause most of those movies are pretty crappy, except for like The Exorcist or something. There may be a few other gems, but that show it's by Robert Kirkman, the guy that did Walking Dead. So he did that comic. It's really good. It's surprisingly
good. All right, I'll put that on the list.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Wham, do you want to add anything about Necronomicon or anything?
Sorry, I was looking at something and my mouth was away from the microphone. Not about Necronomicon specifically, but I'm assuming, Gordon, that you are familiar with Tom Graves' two books, Positively Weird and Weird Allies.
I am aware of them. I have not read them, but yes.
Okay. Well, the reason why I say that is that these are also two books that have sort of influenced me. One of them, Positively Weird, and that's WYRD, as in the web of the weird. The subtitle is Harnessing the Chaos in Your Life. And this was a book that I was exposed to a number of years ago that seems to be similar in some ways to what you're talking about. And what it does is it links some of the ideas of chaos magic to ideas in Northern European rune stuff and European paganism. So I didn't know if you were familiar with them at all, or whether you're familiar with that idea of the weird.
Of course. Yeah,
I assumed that you were because of the rune soup business.
Well, yes. There's not much in the way of runes on rune soup. It's kind of I use the word rune in a wider etymological sense, which, funnily enough, you kind of get towards the end of Starships. It's kind of a play on alphabet soup, obviously. And I like the idea of the weirds. I think it has... I don't think there have been too many contemporary books. Not that I've read Tom Graves' books, although I may well do so now. I don't think there have been too many that have... too many books recently that have kind of conveyed that notion in a way that is... Let me describe it this way. I think the Dr. Kreifel and Whitley Strieber's book, The Supernatural, is a not better, but kind of an easier way for people to get their head around the notion of the weird in the 21st century, and I'd maybe kind of start there before going with it, because the weird, if you look at how it's been used in paganism the last 15 years, kind of takes the teeth out of it and sort of uses it as a weird kind of, I guess that's fate, and it's universally positive. Yeah.
It's not that at all. Well, and he doesn't use it that way. For him, the weird is really, it's really about that. I mean, for him, he links it to the idea of chaos and to certain ideas in Taoism. And it's clear in both of his books. One is just about sort of his own techniques of how he started working with this idea. And the other is specifically applying those techniques to relationships. All the relationships that we have. And I have found both of those books to be very, very useful. And by the way, the book that you just mentioned, Supernatural, is a great book too. I recently read that, and that's, I guess when I read it, I thought to myself, because, I have a PhD, so many years ago, 15 years ago now, I had this idea of being an academic myself, and then I realized, like Nietzsche did many years ago, that, although I am a scholar, I am also something other than scholarly, and so I just really couldn't go that route and remain sane with myself. So when I read...
so you do.
When I read Supernatural, I thought, finally, someone in that position is doing this?
Oh, look, I think I've read all of Dr. Kreipel's previous books, and this was the one where I so enjoyed it. He's kind of going rogue, and he should be applauded for it. I think it was just really refreshing. On a similar note, to see someone he's pushed the edges of a job as a serious academic historically, but this time he's just sort of cards on the table. This is what's going on, and it was really brave and refreshing, and I love it.
Oh, I know. I've been recommending the book. I mean, it's if a person has their own sort of preconceived notions of what they're going to be talking about, they're probably going to be disappointed. But I found it to have some very, very good different ways of thinking about alternate realities. Well, they're not really alternate. They're with us, but we perceive them as alternate. Paranormal experiences, visionary experiences. And I thought that Whitley was actually rather brave in talking about some of his stuff too. So. Yeah,
they certainly picked the right project. I sort of asked how that came about when I was chatting to Dr. Kreipel about it, and he said he initially proposed a novel, and Whitley, I suspect, was curating, going, I'm not sure that's a very good idea. You can kind of see the sort of tennis backwards and forwards of them riffing off their ideas. So I think Dr. Kreipel picked absolutely the right person to go a bit rogue with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess they've been talking to each other for a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
But I would recommend Weird Allies, especially for anybody, Jeffrey, for anybody who's been having any kind of relationship stuff, Jeffrey.
Me.
Jeffrey.
Me too.
I'm still recuperating from a Russian woman since January.
Well, this is what you need to let go of, is the Russian woman.
That one almost killed me, but hey, it was worth it. For the pleasures of the flesh. But no, I was asking her about Positively Weird, because I looked that up too. I want to check those out for sure. I like the Norse. This is Norse stuff, right?
Well, he uses some of that. He also uses some. It's also chaos magic. It's very clearly that, but it's chaos magic that is done more as a contemplative practice than like a ritual thing. You know what I mean? And and he also uses some Taoist stuff. It's obviously whatever. I knew of Tom Graves many, many years ago because he wrote a very well-known book on dowsing. And that's sort of considered a classic in the field of dowsing and pendulum work, called The Art of Dowsing. And that book was like available in the early 90s, and I got it because my father, fundamentalist Christian that he is, he still witches water because he was taught to do that from his father, who was a Shawnee Indian. So he despite his Christian proclivities, he still witched water and did some stuff like that. So I purchased this book to see whether I could learn how to do it, and I didn't have any problem with it at all. So
it's like $2 on Amazon. I love it when that happens.
It's like what is?
$2. It's like $2 on
Well, then go for it, man. And what I would recommend is that you get these books and you actually do the exercises.
I'll definitely check them out, because I definitely, when it comes to women and relationships, I have some kind of weird curse. Something's going on. That's just all right. What do you have to do? You have to face it. You have to face it. Face your weird curse. I don't know if I need to. I think I'll die. but nonetheless, so what are you working on? Any future books or anything you can discuss?
Yeah, sure. Funnily enough, there's one coming out by the end of this month called Pieces of 8, which is the actual Chaos Magic book. Chaos Protocols isn't. Chaos is that's sort of a wider people spiritually or magically inclined, and Starships isn't at all. So I got asked to write by readers, I got asked, are you going to write an actual Chaos Magic book? And I said no, and then all right. So there's one looming, and if people are interested, that will be out in whatever day this is. So it'll be out the end of July, and the information will be on the website.
So would you consider yourself a master wizard?
I would not. I don't think I ever will. I don't think anyone ever should.
Like Gandalf?
Yeah. Well, definitely get grumpy, so there's that. But
well, I've read a lot about magic, but my problem is it seems like I'll do some things, but I don't ever do the exercises or actually do it. It's like I just read it. But I'm into shamanism a lot, and I've done a lot of stuff with creative visualization, and had a lot of great, cool stuff happen with that. I have weird stuff happen all the time where I work at a site where my articles, I get paid by the click, and I'll say a little prayer, and I swear if I don't see the divine running through those clicks every month, I see some weird stuff happen. Stuff getting like 50,000 hits in a week. Like I get something definitely magically is listening to me when it comes to the click look I have. So I've definitely had some experience on that level, but I'd like to practice magic more. I just need to, I guess, not be so lazy. I read it, but I don't do the stuff.
Well, if you've got your own practice, I mean, it's not, the prescription isn't universal. If you do shamanic journey work and that kind of thing, and it's delivering results for you, I mean, congratulations, you're practicing magic. The word doesn't exclusively apply to traditions that involve grimoires and magic circles and that kind of thing. It's if magic exists, and it does, we live in a magical universe, and people are probably doing it, constantly. I mean, life is in some sense magical. At the root of this idea in the West is an animist view of how the universe works. So it's kissing cousins with shamanism. That's obviously where it came from.
Right. Well, and when I say do the exercises, what I mean by that is just apply them in the way that makes sense to you. I mean, what I did like about both of these books when I read them and looked at them, I mean, some of the exercises were similar to things I was already doing, so it was like, so it was like an affirmation of what I was doing. But what's useful about them is that you can just simply sort of play with them to open your mind up to the possibility of other components of yourself. Because I know I have found with myself, with relationships in particular, intimate relationships, is that the truth of the matter is that on some level, I've gotten exactly the relationships I was really looking for. I didn't always tell myself that. I sometimes, lied to myself about what I thought I wanted, because I thought that, being in a relationship was something other than what it was for me. I was using other people's ideas or going solely by my own sort of, I don't know, lust level or whatever you want to put it. But when I look in retrospect at the relationships that I've had and the relationships that I have now, I have exactly the ones that on a deeper level is what I want or need. And that means that they're meeting certain specific needs that I have right now. And you know what? My relationships do not fit into a standard configured pattern. So, because I don't. So, but
well,
I had to get used to. I had to accept that of myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's some advice for getting over the Russian woman.
Absolutely.
She was the Russian woman you needed.
She was the Russian woman you needed at that time.
Well, now it's like I live in the middle of the wilderness with not much social activity at all, but my brother and like his son and my mom. So it's like when you've been in a relationship and you're used to all that intimacy and being with someone, and then suddenly you go 6 months and you haven't touched a woman, you start to feel like dead inside, even though if you fight it. That's where I'm at right now. And then I'll slip back into another one sooner or later and let the chaos begin, I'm sure.
Well.
But, well, let's give Jay an opportunity here before we depart, because it's 8:44. What you up to, Jay?
Well, I kind of wanted to go back to the other book, his first book, Starships, because I was looking at it. It was more sort of my speed than the Chaos Magic. Before the break, you were talking about the different types of mythologies, and you invoked the out of Africa theory. And I'm curious if you looked at any other theories, like there's the newest one is the out of Australia theory, and a few of the guys that I know on Facebook, the Strong brothers in Australia, are strong proponents of the out of Australia theory. So I was curious, you're there now, what do you think of that theory, and have you heard of it?
Oh, sure, and I know exactly who you're talking to. The out of Africa theory is extremely well corroborated insofar as millions of dollars have been spent over 20 years taking tens of thousands of blood samples across the world. So it's fairly well corroborated that there was people like between 70 and 100,000 years ago, a group of people from kind of like the middle of East Africa left Africa, turned right, jogged along the beach, and ended up in island Southeast Asia for about 65,000 BC. That tells us nothing about where we were before that little expedition. That tells us nothing about where humans actually came from. When I rely on genetic data, and I actually went up to Oxford to speak to some of the Genetic Out of Africa project for this reason, because I had questions such as, well, we have fire pits in the north of Britain that are 150,000 years old. We have all these other sort of archaeological pieces of evidence outside of Africa that are demonstrably older than the out of Africa kind of colonizing journey. And so I got multiple responses to that, which is, well, if there were earlier colonizing expeditions and everybody died out, then by definition they won't show up in our genes because they didn't have kids that had sex with, our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. And so there are all these ways of realizing that the out of Africa data tells us something very important, but where it starts to get really dubious, and this is that kind of classic mainstream media, mainstream history view, is that they sort of do a shell game thing where they say, well, out of Africa is proven, ergo this kind of story of where mankind comes from is proven, and that's not correct. Like, the reality is, we actually could have emerged in Asia, walked into Africa, and then we've just got the genetic data that picks up where we sort of got up and left and went back out. I'm completely okay with that. I use the data because it's scientifically corroborated, but it says nothing about where we came from or how we are built. And in that respect, I think it's potentially useful. As for earlier people in Australia, they were definitively there. We have evidence of fire stick farming off the coast of Cairns that's at the sort of 140,000-year-old mark, which is probably modern humans, even though, like, we have evidence just north of Australia of Homo erectus making sort of art with mollusk shells at the 500,000 year ago mark. What is emerging out of this sort of scientific gloom of hopefully the death rattle of materialism is the realization that we were living in a fairly Lord of the Rings world at that point in time. We had The Hobbit, again, very close to Australia, Denisovans, Neanderthal, Homo erectus briefly, modern humans. There's another one that is currently just half a jawbone and a tooth that a fisherman off the coast of Taiwan found pulling his net in. So we've got all these different near-humans who, and again, much like that, do not pretend for a second that our actual ancestors, modern humans, weren't as smart as us. Our brains were even larger back then, for a start. But we now have evidence of the Neanderthal doing things like burying their dead. And my favorite one, there is recently discovered, beginning of this year, in a place called Bruniquel Cave in France, there is a Neanderthal magic circle in a cave that's 177,000 years old. So magic predates modern humans.
That's the one of the crystals.
Yes.
The crystals in a circle.
So what is magic circles predate human civilization? Maybe the Neanderthal taught us that. We don't know yet. What is emerging, and this is very much what Starships is about, is if we actually just realize that our ancestors, they have the same brain, they have the same body shape and metabolism. Well, not body shape, they were definitely fitter, but they have the same sort of metabolism and nervous system and brain as we do. Of course they're going to wonder, what do you think the stars are? What happens when we die? And for me, what I find very inspiring, and this is sort of the beginning of the book, is that we look to spiritual traditions to see if there is an answer at the beginning. But the thing that has been passed down or has survived down through time is the question. that we have asked the same question around campfires that we do, at sleepovers when we're kids and sort of messing around with Ouija boards and that kind of thing. We've asked the same question for a very, very long time, and I find that quite inspiring.
Yeah. The human origin thing is one of the things that I find most intriguing, because we keep finding all these things. Like in your book, the Starships book, you mentioned Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey, and is that they call it a temple. Well, almost every ancient building that we find, we don't know what it is. They call it a temple. Well, how do you know it's a temple?
Well, in Göbekli Tepe's case, it definitely is, because there's no water nearby and there's no evidence of anyone living there. So not only is it a temple, it's a temple somewhere that you can't live. So they needed that site for very important reasons. And it was deliberately buried, so we can be quite confident that it was used for sacred purposes based on the things that we find there, like the bones and the fact that it's essentially a guitar. Like the T-pillars hum when you slap them. So they were using some kind of sound component, some sort of sonic component to it. I was actually just on Richard Hoagland's show last night talking about it. So in Göbekli Tepe's case, it is definitively a star temple on a hill, which we built before we even lived in permanent structures, as far as we can tell. What that means is that materialist, functionalist view of history, where spirituality and religion is a kind of hobby of farmers, that once we learned how to grow things and harvest stuff, we'd sit around a fire and make up stories, and that's where religion comes from, is wrong. Spirituality and viewing the cosmos as spiritual and us as an intimate part of it predates living in permanent structures, let alone farming. It is something that we've always, that is what makes us human. We are like homo ritualist. That's us.
Yeah, and the thing you talked about that building is that it's 12,500 years old, predates almost everything. So do you think that's one of the first magical sites, if not the first magical site?
Well, it's certainly not the. Göbekli Tepe is important because it is almost a Rosetta Stone. So it's much like the Rosetta Stone itself. We got to unlock hieroglyphs because it was written in 3 languages and we could translate one of them, and that was the key that sort of began unlocking Egypt for us. Göbekli Tepe sits right at that point in human history where we moved from sort of nomadism to being a bit more settled. And the earliest layers, we were still hunter-gatherers, and the later layers, we weren't. So there are parts of it that are right on the edge of our human experience and parts of it that aren't. And that allows us to kind of start to unlock some of the meaning. Now, here's something for you. It was deliberately buried, so that's one of the reasons we have it. But it was also mistaken for a Muslim graveyard or an Islamic graveyard for about 500 years, which is why it hadn't been molested, because obviously under Islamic law you don't, I mean, it's rude to do it to anyone, but it's specifically banned in Islam that you go and, dig up graves and so on. It wasn't. It turns out it's this star temple from the Paleolithic. But what that means, it's such an unlikely survival. It is a archaeological miracle that is more important than Tutankhamun's tomb or anything. However, we don't know if every hill in eastern Turkey, 12,000 BC, had one, because it's all gone. I mean, I just left London. They're sort of doing the Crossrail tunnel now. London finds stuff that had only lost 120 years ago. Like, oh goodness, there's a whole orphanage here we didn't know was there. And if we're talking at a time depth of 12,000 years ago, the fact that we have something like this is a miracle, and it shows that even if it was some sort of Paleolithic Vatican, it proves that our ancestors had that same rich and meaningful ritual relationship with the universe, but we don't know if there wasn't one on every hill. Right.
Yeah, and the other thing that I find interesting is with your Starships book is that the reviewer said that you're adamant about debunking the whole alien astronaut theory, and I kind of watch the show because sometimes I make fun of it, but the show host, Georgios Tsoukalos, is, in his credit, he's gotten a lot of this alternate, information out to the mainstream and to, general public, but he picked up a rear walk with a strange symbol on it. He goes, oh, it's got to be aliens. But I think he's doing us a great disservice by saying everything is alien. And so if it's not alien, if you go Göbekli Tepe and those ancient sites, pyramids of Giza and so on, weren't built by aliens, who do you suspect built them? I mean, the Egyptians certainly did not. They didn't have the tools, the technology, or the know-how to do it. So somebody built them on this planet. I'm pretty sure it's another race of humans, but, the history's gone.
Sure. Göbekli Tepe is actually very easy to build. You just hit rocks with other rocks and stand them up. So from what's astounding about it is what it actually represents, question mark around it. My dismissal of ancient aliens is because it is a side effect of a materialist view of history. So it basically says magic is the same as technology. And if you look back at the multiple kind of anomalous data points in the human historical journey, and you look at them and then you turn to official historians who say, oh, no, they used dolerite pounders and they kind of made these little bricks and they stacked them into this triangle shape. You go, well, that didn't happen, so ergo aliens. But you'll notice that it is still a materialist response, because you're still expecting physical organisms with high technology to come down, and that misses what we observe in paranormal studies and magic and everything else. Like we're just talking about Dr. Kreipel's book. The alien answer is unsatisfying for the UFO phenomenon, for the anomalies in history. However, you're dealing with people who can't kind of get their head around, shall we say, an extra-dimensional interpretation rather than alien. So I'm quite down on the ancient alien hypothesis in the post-Sitchin sense of, physical beings arriving in nuclear-powered rocket ships to make mankind, to mine gold, to save their atmosphere. What Sitchin got right was looking at Sumer and saying, well, the official story is nonsense. Here's my best guess. Now, his guess isn't correct, but his first bit was. His first bit was where we are sold a official narrative of history because it has to match the kind of Darwinist capitalist view of the 20th century. So it has to go from less complex to more complex. And better and then worse, because that invalidates the kind of unthinking deep structure of how we view our own culture. And it's wrong. I mean, it is completely wrong. And the people who realize that, the good ones grow out of ancient aliens as physical organisms. Not for a second am I suggesting that we were the only game in town. There is evidence of magic and extra-dimensional. That's what Starships is. It's the story of how do we begin to model the influence of the extra-dimensional on history now that we don't think it was little green men.
Hey, guys, we got to close out. We got Joe Gibson up the signal flares. First off, I wanted to say, Gordon, thanks for doing the show. Really enjoyed it. Great show.
Fabulous.
What's your website?
RuneSoup.
RuneSoup.com. That's the only
correct.
one. RuneSoup.com.
That's correct, and it's also RuneSoup on Facebook as well. If people are about there.
Well, it's been great having you on, man. I've really enjoyed it, and thanks, Wham and Jay. And next week is Keegan Reed and Christopher Jacobs. We're going to talk about understanding Sasquatch. We're going to get our Sasquatch on. Everybody have a good weekend, and thanks for listening. Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Got to plug United. You're listening to United Public Radio 107.7 FM. Good night.
Hello, you're listening to United Public Radio. I'm Joe Montaldo, host of News on the Flip Side. Check us out every Saturday night, 6 to 9 p.m. Central Time.
You are invited to the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show every Friday night on United Public Radio Network from 9 to 10 p.m. Pacific Time, 12 to 1 a.m. Eastern Time, with your spiritual warrior goddess, Kathy Bilski. Kathy will share all the old truths the Illuminati tries to keep secret. Kathy also gives you the opportunity to join in with planetary healing light work that will help us manifest World Enlightenment 2016. So let's get high and fly into new possibilities. So join Kathy every Friday night on UPRN, the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show. A very powerful happening.
Do you love sports? Okay, maybe just at least pay attention to sports. Then check out the Big Shoulder Sports Show, Tuesday night, 7 to 9 Eastern on UPRNTalkRadio.com and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. JT, Justin, and I spill our guts about all things Cubs, White Sox, Blackhawks, Bulls, and Bears with no filter, the way nature intended sports to be heard. We also cover the national news in the sports world, but really, that's just because we have to. The Big Shoulder Sports Show, live Tuesday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on UPRNTalkRadio.com and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. Or check out the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and SoundCloud. 3 guys saying words, making radio happen every week.
Hello, this is Angela Thomas with a message about living life to the fullest. As a psychic clairvoyant, I often give insights to one's career path, financial situation, or relationship. Whether one is happy or not in their current situation, where he or she is right now is an important part of learning valuable lessons that can lead to fulfilling one's life purpose. If I can offer you insights, feel free to contact me at 636-278-2272. Again, 636-278-2272, or visit my website, angelathomas.org. I'm considered a psychic, so I provide accurate and detailed psychic readings for individuals as well as groups. Remember, no matter what influences your life at the moment, live life to the fullest. Stay in gratitude, count your blessings, and prepare yourself for more opportunities around the corner. I'm Psychic Angela Thomas, and my website is angelathomas.org.
The UPRN family of shows would like to take a moment to thank our loyal listeners for tuning in to UPRNTalkRadio.com along with 107.7 FM New Orleans. Broadcasting on multiple platforms like Live 365, Ustream, and Shoutcast has made the UPRN the longest-running, highly rated, and best source of quality, unique programming that is not afraid of the status quo in alternative media. This station has a solid course of shows and hosts that refuse to get stuck in a rut or be overrun by a groupthink mentality, because station owner, host, and iCar founder Joe Montaldo knows the value of letting his talented stable of hosts grow uninhibited. In this genre, that's an accomplishment which many in alternative radio are striving for, but are left consistently wanting. This is all made possible because of you, the listener, that tunes in live every night, who can tell the difference that independent thinking makes. The best way to show our appreciation is to thank you and continue to allow our listeners the ability to download the archives of all the shows free of charge on iTunes, Podbean, and SoundCloud. No monthly fees, no cost to download individual shows, and none of the constant hassling for donations. That's the UPRNradio.com difference. So stick around, there's much more to come with new shows on the way. For now, feel free to join your favorite show live in the Pal Talk chat room, easily accessible off UPRNtalkradio.com, and share the experience of listening live with other listeners from around the world. So thanks for listening, and thank you for being a part of the UPRNtalkradio.com family of listeners.
Hi, come check out Christina George's new show, Aliens, UFOs, and Beyond, Thursday night, 8 p.m. See you Thursday, Jeff. Hi, I'm Joe Montaldo, and you're listening to United Public Radio. You want to learn about aliens, extraterrestrials, UFOs, visitations, military abductions? Join Joe Montaldo on Wednesday night, 8 to 10 p.m. for his episodes of UFO Undercover. Come check out Christina George's new show, Paranormal Connections, only on United Public Radio, Monday, 8 to 10 p.m. See you Monday. Hello, you're listening to United Public Radio. I'm Joe Montaldo, host of News on the Flip Side. Check us out every Saturday night, 6 to 9 p.m. Central Time.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Great moments in speed, delivered by Cable